Welcome back. It is 6:23 here on your Thursday morning. So next week will be the 109th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. And still to this day, the story around it is an international curiosity. We actually had a couple local connections on the ship that you might not know about. So joining us this morning to tell us all about it for Throwback Thursday is Tracy Manning with the Mahoning Valley Historical Society. Tracy, good to see you as always.
Thank you. You too.
I had no idea about this, so I am fascinated already. You hooked me right from the get-go. And one of the names that, I mean, if you've been to downtown Youngstown, you know the name Wic is on a ton of different things. It's a street, and the Wic members of the Wic family, right? We're on board.
Yeah, so the Wic family locally goes back basically to the founding of Youngstown. But by the turn of the 20th century, we had Wic members that were industrial titans, and George Dennick Wic was one of them. He had several roles locally with Youngstown Sheet and Tube, general fireproofing, but his health was kind of failing around the early 19-teens, and his family said, you know what, let's go on a European vacation. So that's what they did, and he went with his second wife, his daughter, one of the family's friends, who was a great friend of his daughter, and then they met up with that family friend, Carolyn Bonnell, her aunt in England. And after their wonderful European vacation, they decide, let's go home on the Titanic. And of course, it did not turn out at all how they wanted it to.
So did everybody survive, or how did that all go?
No. So as we all kind of know, they were only allowing women and children on the lifeboats initially. So with the Wics being in first class, they were actually in the second lifeboat to be lowered down, but it was only the women. And George, the last they saw of him, he was standing on the deck waving goodbye, and that was the last they saw of him.
Oh, that is a heartbreaking image to think about. So obviously this was major, even back then, obviously well before the internet or anything like that. This was still major international news. So how did the city of Youngstown react when one of their own was lost on the ship?
Yeah, the Youngstown Vindicator, really all of the newspapers around here, it was the front page news for more than a week. And in Youngstown itself, they had memorials to George. They had a huge service at his church. And then one of the things they did was they stopped everything in the city of Youngstown as kind of a moment of silence. So everything from traffic to business, and then all of the bells tolled in the city to remember him.
So incredibly, they weren't the only local family on board, right?
No, they weren't. There was a woman who I absolutely love named Shanina. I believe that's how it's pronounced. But here in the United States, she went as Jenny. She was a Lebanese immigrant, and she had traveled back to Lebanon because her son was dying, essentially. She actually didn't make it back in time to see him before he passed away. It took her about a year to make the money so that she could come back, and she got a ticket aboard Titanic. She was traveling with three cousins who were all men, and then one of her cousin's nieces. Now, she was down in steerage in third class, and she ended up surviving. The male members of her family did not, but she and the niece did. And when she comes back here to Youngstown, there's no fanfare. There's no memorial. She was a poor immigrant woman, but her legacy is pretty intense, and I'm going to see if you know anything about that legacy.
Well, I only know what I read in what you told me. So, but share it with all of us, because it's quite the legacy that I'm sure all of us are at least kind of familiar with, whether we realize it or not.
Oh, yeah. So most people have no idea that there's a connection between Youngstown, the Titanic, and ice cream. But in 1918, Jenny bought a waffle iron for her sons, and they started an ice cream cone company. And this was kind of a newfangled thing around that time. Now today, it's still family owned. It's right here in Hermitage, and it's the Joy Ice Cream Cone Company. And the Joy Cone Company is the largest ice cream cone company, and it was all started when Jenny bought that waffle iron.
And survived the Titanic
survived.
in a much different experience than the Wic family, too. I am fascinated by this. I wish we had time for like 17 segments on this because I feel like we could talk about it all day. But unfortunately, our time has come and gone. But Tracy, that was amazing today. Thank you again for joining us with Throwback Thursday.
All right, thank you.
Oh, that was fun. That was fun, wasn't it? All right, let's send it back over to Emily. A lot of fun in the forecast lately, too.
Oh, yeah, that definitely blew my mind. I'm going to have to do some more research on that. All right.